Before we begin, I want to start this off by thanking WeHype and Bethesda for sponsoring this video and supplying me with a copy of the premium edition of Starfield. I would also like to thank all of you, as never in my wildest dreams did I think I would ever be in a position to be able to even be considered as someone worth being sent an early copy of anything to. As of the time of writing this, I have put just a little bit over 50 hours into Starfield. While that may sound like a lot on paper, let me be blunt, I don't even think I am halfway through the main quest yet. I've enjoyed what I've played so far of the story, just thought I'd get that out of the way now. No, the reason I haven't progressed much of the plot is because, in true Bethesda fashion, I keep getting sidetracked by every single small thing that I see. This has ranged from random planets that I think look interesting enough to explore, taking up bounty missions, and generally just exploring some of the game's cities and talking with its people. With that in mind, you can probably understand why this is more of an impressions video as opposed to a full review. If I was going to do that, you'd probably be waiting until sometime next year. I jotted down a few notes for aspects I wanted to touch on, and I'm going to try and talk about them in some sort of cohesive way, but that's not something I'm very good at, so I apologise if this video ends up being all over the place. I don't even really have a script for today. Also, don't worry about the background footage, it's just going to be random snippets of gameplay. Outside of maybe the very first mission or the tutorial, I'm going to refrain from showing story quests. No main story spoilers here. Firstly, let's touch on the most important part. How does the actual gameplay feel? Honestly, pretty great. The game uses Fallout 4 as a base, which is pretty clear when it comes to combat, so if you're familiar with how that game plays, then you should be able to slip right into Starfield with no issues. A few of the controls are a little bit different, like having to click in the right analog stick to melee with your gun as opposed to the RB button, but I'm sure that's nothing that swapping around the controls won't fix if it bothers you. Something that's hard to explain without actually playing for yourself though, is that the weapons just feel better than they did in Fallout 4. Like, they have more weight to them where it matters, and enemies react more appropriately. The best example that I can think of off the top of my head is that when I shot someone with a high-powered revolver, the recoil I received and the pushback when the bullet collided with the enemy felt how you would expect given that it's a high-powered magnum. Unlike in Fallout 4, where a lot of the guns outside of explosive weapons had a very similar effect on people. That's if you're even using guns, mind you. We all know what I'm like. First thing I went for was the melee weapons, more specifically, unarmed combat. Just like guns, there's a lot of weight behind every swing of your melee attacks, which can obviously be a good or bad thing depending on your preference. I personally don't mind it, but it did take a bit of getting used to, as more than a few times I got staggered while winding up a punch. Whenever I did get used to the timing though, I was quickly wiping out whole rooms of enemies with little effort. When comparing damage, unarmed combat does less than using a melee weapon of course, but focusing on it pays off in the long run, as some of the later perks can make it so you're constantly sweeping enemies off their feet, or just outright stunning them altogether. Speaking of perks, let's talk about them. If you have played any of Bethesda's recent games, then this should look fairly familiar, although there is a neat small twist. They have combined aspects of both Skyrim's and Fallout 4's perk trees to create what I think is a great combination of the two. So unlike Fallout 4, perks are not level gated anymore, rather you just need to put a certain number of perk points into a tree to unlock its next set of perks. But like Fallout 4, each perk itself has multiple levels. This time around, every perk can be taken up to 4 times to gain new effects. This is where Skyrim's system comes into play. Rather than taking one rank in a perk and then being told you need to reach a certain level before you can take it again, now, after you take a perk, you're given a small challenge you must complete. In this case for Boxer, I need to take out a set number of enemies while unarmed. After doing so, the next time you get a perk point, you can increase the rank right away. This continues throughout all of the ranks, by the way. This means that if you are determined enough, you could literally spend your first 4 levels focusing on just one perk and have it maxed out by the time you reach level 5. Needless to say, I'm really enjoying this aspect of the leveling so far. Being able to double down and make my way from planet to planet to find things to beat up so that I could just become the best boxer in the galaxy was a hilarious, yet fun way to begin my playthrough. Since I guess we're talking about builds, I may as well jump into character creation very briefly. When it comes to actual customization, I cannot comment too much on it. My eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed by now that I tend to make some variation of the same human character in every game that I play. However, the background and trait system, now that is something that I mess with. It's not a new idea by any means, but it is nice to see it included here. For your background, you pick from a list of previous occupations, each of which gives you the first rank in 3 different perks depending on what you pick. It also opens up the occasional unique dialogue interaction. I, for instance, went with Bouncer, shocker I know, and so I got some unique interactions when it came to helping people intimidate or push around others. I think on one occasion it allowed me to essentially negotiate for a better reward, given that I was better qualified for the job, but don't quote me on that, as that was very close to the beginning of my playthrough and I wasn't recording footage at the time, so unfortunately I do not remember where it was, and I do not have the footage to double check. Sorry. Now, while having a background is mandatory, traits are entirely optional, and they work how you would expect. Most provide a benefit, along with a slight hindrance. I wasn't very creative with my traits, I'm gonna be honest. I went with the ones that added the adoring fan from Oblivion, because I love Oblivion, one that gave me more health and oxygen at the cost of healing items being less effective, and finally, some loving parents. This is going to be a very odd remark out of context, but having parents is awesome. Sure, they will take a very, very small cut out of your credits once a week, but my dad also randomly handed me an M1911 as a gift, so Father of the Year right here. It'll usually be a bit before you see some of these traits in action, which brings me to one of my slight gripes with the game so far, and it's one I've seen repeated quite a bit, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, but the intro is quite slow compared to the rest of the game and it takes a while to get going. It may cause some people to check out, but I implore you to keep going as it gets so much better after you make it to the first city. While things may seem very by the numbers at first as you're engaging in combat after combat, it's not long before you can spread your wings and explore more of what the game has to offer. Case in point, arriving in your first city, it won't be very long before you're flooded with side quests and activities to keep you busy. Also, don't skip on the side activities, they're essentially this game's equivalent of Radiant quests. Now, while some will have you perform similar tasks like going to planets, clearing out enemies, and surveying the land, others can include more unique scenarios. For example, my personal favourite one so far had to do with a doctor who was getting very sick and tired of tourists on her home planet, so she devised a plan to get rid of them. And what was the solution? She has you dress up as a monster and just run full sprint towards the tourists as you scare them off the planet for good. This entire interaction takes about 5 minutes tops, but it really helps spice things up in between a lot of the other longer quests that have you jumping from planet to planet. While you might not be able to freely fly across the entire galaxy in its entirety, and are instead relegated to systems and zones within those systems, I was still surprised by how much time I wanted to spend on my ship. The ship combat, if I were to compare it to something, it would be like the Long Night of Solace saber combat from Halo Reach. I'm sure there are much better examples, but I play a lot of Halo, so it's the very first thing that came to mind. Basically, every ship has 2 life bars, one for shields and one for the hull. You then have weapons that are better at taking down one over the other, and it's entirely up to you how you build your ship around that. While kind of simple in concept, it's surprisingly fun and even difficult at times. I found myself getting decimated by some pirates early on, mainly due to me not upgrading my ship, or having any perks to increase its damage and defenses. I then took some time to complete a few side quests, took the money from said quests, and then spent that time crafting my personal warship. This is the Suppose. It's a play on the surprise from Master and Commander, as well as my inability to make up my mind most of the time. With my new upgrades, I was then able to go back and slaughter those pirates with ease. This is where I've actually been sinking most of my time into, if I'm honest. I go out and make money however I can, and then spend literal hours tinkering with my ship. It gives me the same sense of accomplishment as building my own house in Skyrim, only this time my house can now fly and helps me commit war crimes. Those crimes do come at a cost, mind you, be that a literal fine you have to pay, or jail time. Let's talk about jail, as it has an effect that is annoying, but I also love it. So, you know in Skyrim, whenever you went to prison, you would only lose some of the experience to your next skill level? So like if you were halfway between level 50 and 51 of the one-handed skill, going to prison could remove those gains and push you back to 50, but you were never going to go below that current level back to 49. This means you would just level the skill up and then go to prison right after to negate the effects. Well, Starfield has an answer for that. It operates on your basic run-of-the-mill XP system, just like Fallout. Well, whenever you go to prison, you lose XP. How much is determined by your crimes, and therefore how long you spend in prison. If you were thinking you could just level up and then immediately head to prison to negate the effects, you are very wrong. The XP that you lose for your crimes will be subtracted regardless of how much you've progressed through your current level. This means, while you may never be able to lose a level, you can incur a sort of XP debt as it goes into the negative. At one point I had minus 500 XP, so that was an extra 500 on top of what I already needed to level up. As I said, it's quite the penalty, but I love that my actions actually have a consequence that affect my character's growth, meaning committing crimes and trying to get away with them has some actual weight to them as opposed to just a slap on the wrist. I know what I've been talking about has been kind of all over the place, but I want to wrap things up by talking about performance and what I will classify as Bethesda-isms, like stuff you expect to see if you're a longtime fan of their games like me. If you haven't figured it out by now, I have been playing the game exclusively on Series X at 4K 30 FPS. The footage in the background is unfortunately captured at 1080p, which is my own fault, as I have been meaning to get a better capture card for a while and keep putting it off. For no real reason, I might add. Why did I opt for an Xbox code though, when I have a PC that could run the game just fine? Well, for one, it's just my preferred system to play on, as I don't like messing with graphics settings and I would rather just jump in and play the video game. Plus, I record all of my other videos off my Series X, so felt it would be fitting. Now for how it runs? Honestly, smooth as butter. I only saw one single noticeable frame drop in my entire playthrough, and it was whenever I entered one of the major towns for the first time. I had a massive bounty on my head, so I had the entire security force plus all of the townsfolk running round and screaming the whole time, so I can't really complain, as I said, it was only for about a second. As for the locked 30 FPS, after the first 20 minutes, I didn't even notice. 60 frames per second is of course nice and all, but 30 is by no means unplayable no matter what people will tell you online. I played Skyrim and Fallout 4 for 10 years and 6 years respectively at 30 and never had a single problem, and Starfield is no different. Moving on, the rest of the game also runs shockingly well. I don't think anybody would argue that this is, by far, the most polished Bethesda game we have ever seen. It also looks great as well, so I'm doubly impressed. In my entire 50 hours of playtime, I have only encountered a single glitch, and it was in no way, shape or form game-breaking, but rather just kind of funny. I have no clue how I triggered it, as I tried to replicate it out of curiosity, but it never happened again. So that's good actually. Finally, something that I know a lot of people always like to see in Bethesda games, yes, there is a lot of clutter, more than I have ever seen, and you can interact with all of it. This means you can either be one of those people who spends hours of their time meticulously placing objects just right to make a comfortable living area, or you can be like me and use it to have some stupid fun, like when I randomly shoved this dead scientist into a nearby fridge. It might be far too soon to judge, but as of right now, Starfield is up there with Oblivion for me in my all-time favourite Bethesda titles. Honestly, it's a toss-up between this, Oblivion, and Fallout 3. It taps into my favourite aspects of these games, the exploration, and just accentuates that feeling of I can go anywhere and possibly see anything, and then constantly be surprised by what I do find. Hell, I didn't even touch on huge parts of the game like factions, outposts, crew, and even companions. That is simply because, while I have messed around with some of them, I have barely scratched the surface of what they have to offer. I will say that outposts, which are this game's settlements, are mostly optional, so if you weren't a huge fan of that in Fallout 4, you can breathe a sigh of relief. As of right now, my final verdict is it's a game much like Bethesda's Best that I will be playing for years to come, one part because I have been loving everything about it so far, and another because I will more than likely still be finding out new things 10 years from now. Plus, you know I'm going to do a bunch of stupid runs, just because I can, and I cannot wait to dive into all of them. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long and get off topic too much, so I'm going to go back to playing Starfield because I still need to finish this story before I record those videos, so I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video.